Judge Joe Brown. Been a while, man. Welcome back.
I'm here. The judge is in the house.
Been a while. It's a lot I want to ask you about. It's a lot I want to get your take on. I guess we could start with Don Lemon. How you feel about him and the protesters storming into the church?
He made a nice case against himself under federal law. I think he's got some problems. That's going to be 18 United States Code, Section 111. And that's going to be quite interesting. So he's being cute about it, but I think it's going to backfire. They're used to somebody looking the other way and instead of enforcing the law. So I think it's time that the sheriff rode into town. And I think Mr. Lemon is going to be restrained when he goes out of town. But that latest little stunt in that church was ridiculous.
You feel like it was inappropriate?
Yes, very inappropriate. You have a right to demonstrate, but the demonstrations beforehand, they keep referring back to the civil rights era, 65 years ago. Those things took place in public facilities and on the streets, and by design, they were orderly. The people that got out of order were the law enforcement types that were representing Jim Crow elsewhere in the country, not the protesters. And that kind of thing did not happen until the late 1960s when you started getting the anti-war discriminations and a certain amount of militancy where the object was to create public disorder, chaos, and violence rather than having peaceful demonstrations. They kind of got it wrong. So this was a church. They had no business disrupting a public assembly, religious proceedings, a number of other things. They broke some local laws and some federal ones. So there are consequences. And it's time people understood when you do things, you have to pay the piper for what you put on to play.
You personally, how you feel about Don Lemon?
I don't like him, never have. He's not what I call a conscientious person. He's always, shall we say, in the moment. Whatever seems to enable him to sensationalize something or capitalize on something he does with no apparent concern for the ethics of the situation. But that was CNN. I guess maybe his husband will make him feel better when he gets arrested or put the money up for his bond.
Yeah, I know Nicki Minaj, she called out Don Lemon and they started going at it. She called him a cocksucker.
Isn't that kind of what they do with that kind of activity? I mean, that's the name of the game, isn't it? One of the things I thought that was quite popular, with that. Yeah. Anyway, Don Lemon is kind of he's amusing. The only problem is he's riding on a wave that is about to subside, and that wave was when that side of things got a free ride and promotion, and anybody to the contrary was censored badly. This is something I'm not used to. I mean, I've been around for quite a bit of time, been full grown, able to buy whiskey, vote, and all that other stuff for more than half century. And before that, way before I was even breathing, when I researched the matter, and for most of my lifetime, nobody's ever gotten on you in America for thoughts or discussion of concepts. They might have gotten on you for being pornographic about it, obscene about it, but not the concepts. Nowadays, you can have full frontal anything you want to show. everything graphic, any kind of language, but you can't discuss certain concepts, and that's just very un-American. That's not cool. That leads to censorship and a type of censorship associated with a certain kind of socialism, National Socialist Workers' Party type socialism. And where do we know that from? We know it from its acronym, which in Deutsch, Sprachen Sie Deutsch? Ja. In German, it is NAZI. Those letters stand for National Socialist Workers' Party, and we know that as Nazi. And that's where we're going. It's a form of fascist oppression that is being postured and fluffed off as though the other side is the one that's engaged in the oppressive activity because they resist it. Well, I've been banned from Facebook permanently, and I've never posted anything because they apparently objected to what I was posting on X. X won't tell me why they suspended me, except that I'm supposed to have had numerous complaints, but I've never got one. The only thing I can think of is I had a set to with Grok a time or two, or Grok. And what wound up happening is I won. So I guess maybe that's retaliation. They cut out 1.1 million accounts one weekend. I got cut out. First, they were saying I was an imposter, but me, I'm talking about it right now. And last time I checked, I was me.
Terrible. Hopefully you get your accounts back, man. But I do want to backtrack. I want to go back to Nicki Minaj. How you feel about the backlash she got for speaking at the Turning Point event?
Let's put it this way. Sometimes people forget that the general public likes to be told what's right and wrong. That's why people used to go to church. The preacher stood up there and he preached about sin and wrongdoing. Now, churches never talk about sin, they talk about belief because they don't want the collection plate to be too empty. They like it not to jingle, but to have the sound of swishing paper in there, checks or cash money, you know, or pledges. And that's good for business. It's called pulpit pimping. Somebody's interested in a new car or upscaling the house that they can afford to get from the pulpit subsidies that their congregation can't afford because of high interest rates. So there is that. And when somebody speaks out, you get this, is it a big uproar or is it a big lie where it's just a few people on the editorial board who empathize with the position being attacked, who want to claim many people are upset by what the celebrity said? It's like, no, there aren't. It's a propaganda tactic. I studied it back at UCLA almost 60 years ago now. And it is a tactic wherein you claim that many, many people support this or many, many people are against that, when actually very few care one way or the other, and usually a lot are negative to the proposition you're trying to push. So it's just a tactic, and that can bring you back to, are you looking at the National Socialist Workers' Party revived from 1933 when they took control in Germany? And we're looking at it again quite a few years later in 2026. I'm I'm not a great fan of hers because some of what she says is too raw, and I think it sets up the wrong imagery for young adolescent females. But, she said the right thing then. She did the right thing. She had the right message. So, it is what it is. More power to her.
So even though you're not a big fan of hers, you still support her speaking at that Turning Point event.
Well, it's not that. I just say sometimes you have to be aware of your effect on children, and sometimes they aren't so discerning as adults, even though some people like to say little people, uh, they're not adults. So you have to be careful what message you send to them because they'll take the superficial aspect of a message, they emulate it. They think what they're up to is endorsed, and it may not be good for their future interest. But what she did this time, she got a base hit with it.
Yeah, it was crazy to see a lot of her fans turn on her.
I don't think a whole lot of her fans turned on her, and I don't think a whole lot of people are going after her. I think what is going on is that's what the news media, the, shall we say, communications and entertainment industries would like you to think, because too many of the people involved in those industries are sympathetic to or supportive of the position that she was going against. See, if I don't like something, and the only way you can find out about what is going on is through me, I can tell you anything I want to. And if I say yay or nay, it's not going out in the publication I'm in charge of, you won't know the difference. And if the people who are in charge of the other publications usually meet up with me in the bar area of a five-star hotel to sit on the leather upholstered couches and chairs and sip Chablis and nipping on some nice, delicate wafers and cheese, well, we can tell you anything we want to, and you'll believe it. If what is the old saying? I think it's from Joseph Goebbels, the Nazi minister of propaganda. Tell a lie long enough and loud enough, and you can get anyone, including the liar, to believe it.
But how you feel about the woman who was killed by the ICE agent in Minnesota?
What I saw, she was dead wrong in terms of put herself in a position where the officer had a legitimate justification for using deadly force. Her wife was driving the car or in the car, and they hit him. And I hear this all the time. He shouldn't have done it. I said, well, you know what? In self-defense, you don't have to wait until somebody runs you through with their sword before you can engage in defending against a potential sword thrust. Because by the time they've run you through, you may already be dead and just not know it. So you don't have to wait till that happens. You can react. So it's like, hey, get ready for it. It's like the John Wick franchise. There are consequences. You need to be very much aware of the consequences. And when you're demonstrating, that does not mean interfering with law enforcement. You can photograph it or doing something else, but when you stick your nose in it and you get physically involved in the whole thing, you got a problem. So I'm looking at what's on the video. You've got a flow of traffic going in one direction. You've got somebody with their vehicle parked perpendicular to the flow of traffic. It's blocking a lot of things. You need to comply with what the officers are saying, so get the devil out of the way so that things do not get out of hand and the public peace, dignity, and order is broken. That's a bad thing. So when you put yourself in that kind of situation where you are defiant, you decide that instead of stopping the vehicle and awaiting instructions with your hands clearly in view, you decide you're going to do what you do. Well, that guy wants to go home and see his family at night, have his dinner, and get out of his cold or cramping clothing and the heavy gun belt, etc., and be with his family and friends day after tomorrow. And there are a whole lot of people that don't get that chance because they gave somebody a break. And the question is, what did he see from his perspective. Now, that's the question. And if somebody, a lot of states say, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, if you find that the defendant had a reasonable apprehension that he was about to be subjected to death or serious bodily injury, he may act in self defense, even using deadly force. This defense remains even if he is mistaken as to all of the circumstances, so long as it's an honest mistake. And the process of determining whether or not the actor is acting with reasonable and honest suspicion that he is about to be subjected to serious bodily injury or death, you may look to the involvement of the deceased party in activities, participating in, etc., utterances or reputation for or involvement with things that indicate violent propensity. And look at what's happened with the BLM stuff, the George Floyd protest, the Breonna Taylor protest, the riots, the multiple homicides that have occurred over the last number of years. And would somebody say, okay, she's screaming and hollering, or whoever that is in the car with her, and they are not being responsive, and they hit me, are they going to run over me? And, sometimes there's this thing where there's this adrenaline flow, and some people may not be as nervy or calm, cool, and collected under stress as others. They used to say self-defense was generated by an apprehension. Now it's a fear. Apprehension and fear do not mean the same thing. 245-pound linebacker confronted by a 90-year-old, 85-pound frail woman may not be fearful if she draws her hand back to strike him, but he certainly might be apprehensive that he is about to be struck. So fear isn't really necessary, but in the recent few decades, people have, gotten into this. It's okay to be fearful. It's okay to run. And they have struck apprehensive from the way the law used to read to fearful as it now reads. So when you put that into the mix and you define it and you give it to the juries to elaborate on, it's a lot of times the guy is just scared, the woman's just scared. So it puts complications in the mix, but the standard is not whether you feel sorry for the victim, not whether somebody didn't act on the best of standards in his or her response to the circumstances. It's simply under the law, did the person have a reasonable fear or apprehension that he or she was about to be subjected to death or serious bodily injury? And serious bodily injury could be a broken or crushed foot, broken femur, tibia or fibula, somebody get a broken leg, internal injuries, and you've got a 4 or 5 thousand pound car there. That's pretty dangerous contrivance to be faced with. And he's in front of it. He shouldn't have been in front of it. Well, his job under the law, and he took an oath to obtain, well, not obtain, but to enforce the law, is to stop what's going on. So he's there saying, and if she wants to move up on him, then you have to determine whether he was, in fact, apprehensive or fearful that something was about to go down that would subject him to some serious injury, or being at somebody's funeral, his own, as the special guest of the moment.
So you feel like the shooting was justified?
Yeah, it was justified. It was a good kill. I tried as a defense lawyer. I think it was about 42 first degree murder cases where the state was demanding the death penalty. One time I got the youngest person in the world on a death row off um, death row. I got the Arkansas Supreme Court to unanimously set aside his conviction. He was supposed to have been 13 years old, killed a 13-year-old classmate and two 70-year-old women he was supposed to have. And there were a number of things wrong with the trial, but he was sentenced to die, and I got the conviction overturned. So I've handled a lot of killings. And there were a bunch more where the death penalty wasn't asked for. In Tennessee, we've got a thing where everybody's entitled to two attorneys on a death penalty case, even if you can afford one. So the rule we have is you can't be one of those appointed attorneys unless you have had so many serious felony jury trials, and you have to sit as second attorney to somebody who has the experience. If you get the experience sitting in the second chair, then you have to have somebody in the second chair backing you up when you were in the first chair with enough trial experience so you don't stub your toe. That was me. So nobody that I was involved in is on anybody's death row, even though the death penalty was demanded. But homicide is what it is. And humans do kill each other with great alacrity. And as a matter of fact, right now I'm in Memphis, Tennessee, which by any metric is the most dangerous place to be in the United States of America, and the 10th most dangerous in the whole world. There are only 9 cities or areas that are more dangerous than being here, and all of them are somewhere looking like it's third world.
Did you hear Stephen A. response to the woman getting killed?
As he said, he doesn't think it should have been done, but he's not disputing the person's legal authority to do it. Smith is interesting. He's a bit dynamic and vocal, but I like him.
How you feel about the people that call him an Uncle Tom?
Well, Dr. King, whose holiday we just got through celebrating, said it's an act of cowardice, moral cowardice, to refuse to criticize something that you are associated with that needs to be criticized. You see, for some reason, speaking out against something is supposed to be bad, and nobody but you is supposed to be given the right to criticize it. But we study what happened in Germany, but we're not Germans. We handle what happened in Japan, but we're not Japanese. We handle what happened to Native Americans, and you're not Native American nor white. So we do these things of criticizing history so we learn from its mistakes so we don't repeat the errors in our future. You see, you don't have to just confine yourself to something that looks like you. Humanity is a universal thing. So you look at humanity and you learn the lessons. Truth has no face but truth itself. So you arrive at the truth. You deal with the past events as a canvas upon which a painting is there that you critique so you can understand how that applies to your circumstances, so you can guide what your circumstances are so you have a good future rather than a bad one. And this thing about you're not supposed to criticize yourself is ridiculous because, to a great extent, there are a lot of things that have been wrong with, say, the civil rights thing, the militant thing, a whole lot that's been done wrong over the last 50 some years when it comes to glorifying dysfunction and inappropriate behavior that seems to become so popular. Hey, man, it's about pimping, man. Or I said, man, you got to pimp your ride, man. That's a horrible thing. I used to represent pimps. Pimps are some of the lowest creatures you can ever run into, but it's glorified. We don't talk about people who are doing something conscientious. We seem fixated on the burglars, thieves, murderers, uh, con artists, the ne'er do well, the people that know not ethics and morality or good standards of character. That's what's presented to us, and the idea that this propaganda machine is in error just doesn't compute with too many people, so they see it on the screen. And for the last 120 some years, since the turn of the 19th, 20th century, young people all over the world have guided what they do and what they think is appropriate by what they see in this graphic entertainment known as the movie, now television or cable or social media. And that's the voice of the village, so to speak, the big village that says this is how you behave. If you aren't supposed to act this way, why do they have it up there with a positive message where the villain is the hero and he prospers?
How you feel about Trump not giving Diddy a pardon?
Well, Diddy's case has not gotten all the way through the system. Um, Diddy, I suspect, was engaged in an act of self defense of sorts by getting blackmail information over a 15-year period on people he had to work with so that he could keep things on an even plane. He found out what a freak he and his acquaintances were, what freaks they were, and a lot of people got disgusted. But that's what I've told folk. When you start ideating on being like the people that entertain you, be careful, because you may be into something else if you emulate them, what they're really about. You see, these people are to entertain you, and that means creating images and impression that may be totally fictitious rather. So you're basing what you are about on an adult who spent their entire lifetime being about fantasy, make believe, fiction, and disassociation of the current situation from reality. So be careful. Now, one of the things I don't think Trump wants to do is to diffuse what may come out of this with ongoing investigations that are suggested by what occurred. The Mann Act is something that was created for very poor reasons. Mann was a senator from Illinois, and he was very upset that a very tall, powerful black man known as Jack Johnson, the first black world heavyweight boxing champion, had a white wife. And she and her friend girls used to be a large entourage of this very large, strong, undefeatable black man traveling all around the country with. So the act as passed says transporting women across national borders or state lines for what used to be phrased as illicit purposes. The FBI came into being, the Federal Bureau of Investigation, to set up the developments that led to the Mann Act and also investigate to see if Mann Act violations were occurring. So Jack Johnson was with his lawful wife, and they were going through a corner of a southern state, and they stopped at the first stop 15 minutes into the state. And the federal marshals boarded a train along with some FBI agents who were not armed in those days. They weren't authorized to be armed. They arrested Jack Johnson. Jack Johnson wound up getting convicted. he escaped and fled to France, and his mother, and I think very ill-advisedly, begged him to come back for a visit. He tried to sneak in, got caught, and he wound up getting more time for the escape than he did for the violation, which was just 1 year. So he wound up dying in a car wreck in 1946, they say. Obama wouldn't pardon him, but President Trump did during his first administration, and it was rightful, and it should have been, because a lot of American black folk looked up to Jack Johnson the way more recent generations looked up to, say, Muhammad Ali. Now, it is what it is, and that's how the FBI came into being. And J. Edgar Hoover was treated as, is he colored or is he white? And his family got run out of Louisiana for trying to pass for white by the Klan. So he always had a hatred for the Klan, but he had a hatred for other black folk because of some negatives. And he was being treated as a fancy boy for third floor activity in some of the New York brothels, where he set up an informant net, and he got the lowdown on a lot of elected officials, some 90+% of whom had some form of a sexually transmitted disease back when, and he used it ultimately to blackmail them, and became director of the FBI, and the FBI became armed because he wanted to have the power and authority to command armed men. So he used his blackmail information to get legislation passed that armed the FBI. That's how the FBI came into being, to get Black Jack Johnson, because he had a white wife. Now, by the time we get to Diddy, that transporting across state lines for illicit purposes got modified by statutory changes, and it was for purposes of prostitution. But for that matter, stuff that you see on, let's say, Pornhub, or Kim Kardashian and Ray J had out for 20 some years at $4.95 a hit on Xfinity, Comcast, most major hotels and motels in America, that crossed international lines. So that would have been Mann Act material if somebody had chosen to go after them, but nobody did. So that's the kind of thing we were talking about. What you were looking at when you saw the trial was the pimp game, and it was what it was. It's a nasty, dirty game that I alluded to before, that people fantasize about and push. Man, oh, it's about pimping, man. No, it's not. It's a filthy thing, but you were looking at pimping light 1.0. You weren't looking at heavyweight pimping. So if you think that was bad, you should see the real deal. And the other thing that I was surprised defense didn't do is bring in psychological proof about S&M, sadomasochism. And another thing, too, about the dynamics of why would that woman stay there 11 years? Where I'll be candid and admit, 45 years ago, I got a lot of my bills paid because I was representing pimps and prostitutes. And I wound up setting up some programs to help the prostitutes escape from the pimps. But the thing was, they had to stay off of what was known as the hoe track. In other words, out there on the streets where the booty gets sold and the merchandise of them gets moved. They wouldn't stay off that track so the pimps could find them, and they'd stay in it in perpetuity. So we saw a dynamic of that where somebody was there for 11 years, had, what was it, allegedly two new boyfriends. She was away for a year with one and some considerable time with another, but went back. And that is a reality of how that game works. But the defense didn't put all of that on, and he got convicted of the Mann Act. Now, he's already served more time than what Jack Johnson got on the first conviction 100 years ago. So most of the time, some of the real pimps that do it rough way out in the street, they get popped for that. I used to have clients that would have ladies working for them or women working for them in West Memphis, Arkansas, and they'd come across the bridge into Memphis, Tennessee, and then go down to what has been fantasized in P Valley, down in Mississippi, which is just across a residential, sometimes commercial street in the Memphis, Tennessee, Mississippi area. So when the FBI wanted a pimp to inform on somebody, they'd bust him for Mann Act violations, and we'd go through this song and dance. Even had a case where two school teachers, a man and a woman, had dated in high school. They had gotten married, started teaching school. They got divorced, ran into each other at a conference in Arkansas. They stopped at a motel, had a couple of drinks, left one of them's car over there, drove over to Memphis. He bought her some shoes and a purse at a department store. They got a room, and the feds kicked in the door because they had the guy under surveillance, not because of anything he had done, but they were interested in his brother who was in large scale drug trafficking. So he got charged with the Mann Act, and they wanted to get him intimidated and coerced into testifying or being a witness against his brother. But the fact of the matter was, he didn't like his brother so much and hadn't seen the guy literally for 5 years. So I established it to the satisfaction of the staff at the time. This is 40 some years ago. That, hey, this guy wouldn't be able to help you. He's an honorable man. So they wound up dropping the charges, and that's where it went. But that's what they do with the Mann Act.
Yeah, a lot of people believe that, he didn't give him a pardon because, Diddy made some negative comments about him in the past.
Oh, yeah. I mean, free speech. I mean, they used to have a thing in politics, say anything you want to about me. Just make sure you spell or pronounce the name right so I get the free PR. They had a famous governor in Louisiana who said, they can say anything they want to say about me, but the only way they'll defeat me is to catch me in bed with a dead woman or a live boy. I guess that last part doesn't play anymore, but it still get pretty bad situation if you get caught in bed with a dead woman. But I guess when people attack Trump, it's actually doesn't hurt him anymore because he's the Baba Yaga to a certain crowd, and they take so many opportunities to go take shots at him that the faithful, so to speak, who follow him just say, oh, eh. And a lot of people are beginning to say, they hate that guy so much, he must be doing something right because they aren't doing too much right themselves. They've had these opportunities to run stuff and they haven't done a good job. And now we find out they're stealing. So what is this? It's like this thing down in Mississippi. The allegations read interestingly. It's in Jackson, Mississippi. They wrapped up a former mayor and some city councilmen and some other places, and it looks just like what they're doing in Memphis, allegedly. But it's like, okay, you say you want to run stuff, you say it's time for you to have charge of running stuff. Well, act like you can do it rather than blowing your chance all over the country. What's wrong here? You in place in the biggest and most powerful and most affluent cities in the United States, but you keep messing up.
But you personally, do you feel like that played a part in him not getting a pardon? All the negative comments he made about Trump in the past?
Trump is just entering his second year in office. There are 3 more years to go. let's see how this works out. It may be an appellate court might kick the whole thing. And in the process, if you pardon him, you may cut yourself off from finding out what else is going on. Like when Diddy first started coming under suspicion, I said, you know what? This sounds like somebody is upset because in 15 years of recordings with all of these freak parties going on, somebody is there that doesn't want that fact to come out or that allegation to come out, so somebody's being protected. So who's being protected, and what are we abusing um, criminal law to prosecute somebody, persecute them so they can't say anything about somebody? That's why we have the Bill of Rights, so that doesn't happen. But it's completely flaunting the Bill of Rights, this so-called lawfare. So is that what's really behind this whole thing? So Diddy kind of put himself right in the midst of, there was some reprehensible characteristics of what he was doing. And it's not nice. The whole thing about being into what looked like pimping, I'll say that as an allegation, is not clean. So, you know, law has this thing of if you want relief, make sure your hands are clean. So his hands aren't exactly clean of some of the things, even if the consequences are a little bit wrong in terms of what is trying to be accomplished. You don't go out and persecute somebody to protect somebody's reputation. And 15 years worth of recordings will have deterred a lot of people in the entertainment and communications industries who might have otherwise done some foul things to somebody, but they held back because they knew that somebody had damning evidence on them. So, who else did you hear about at these large, several time a week freak parties? You see, you didn't hear too many names, did you? And remember, this is going on several times a month for 15 years. So, who didn't you hear about it? What big time celebrities or politicos came to these events to get their freak on and have a little adventure and didn't want anything told? Who knows?
You believe it was big names involved?
Yes, and I think some of them were involved in the political process, sometimes very high up. And I'm not talking about the current president, Mr. Donald Trump. I'm not talking about him. And by the way, the whole thing about the Epstein thing, we might as well touch on that. I know anytime I'm someplace, I really hate it when somebody's hiding, trying to take a picture long distance with their phone over somebody's shoulder. I said, come on, you want a picture? Stand here and ask me. Yeah, you can have a picture. Come on, get one. I don't know. But I always act like I like people, which I do. So I'll shake the person's hand. We may smile or whatever it might be. And if somebody showed the picture, 5, 6, 7, sometimes somebody showed me a picture that was taken 26 years ago, was interesting. Said, we took a picture one time. Yeah, how about that? See, somebody might come back 20 years. You took a picture with this guy and he just got out of the penitentiary for armed robbery. Well, how do I know that? I'm just glad handing somebody who is a constituent or a supporter or a fan. So people need to get off of this inquiring minds nonsense that used to be the phrase for what was it? Oh, yeah, National Enquirer. Inquiring minds must know. So be patient. What did Obi-Wan tell Luke? Patience is a great virtue, Padawan. It is. Justice grinds slowly, and when it's rushed, it tends to miscarry. Which is, by the way, one of the reasons you haven't seen indictments. Uh, the current administration has been in office just that 1 year. It had to spend a lot of time getting things set up. The appointed U.S. attorneys had to be confirmed, which is one reason that Tisha James got out from under the indictment. It wasn't saying there was nothing to the indictments. The ruling was just that the person that brought them was not properly installed in the position that they were operating out of. So it's not over. And the more time they spend on it, the more time they develop. See, it's not like television where you turn on the program, you get 32 minutes of commercial and 28 minutes of content. And in those 28 minutes, you see the crime, you are the fly on the wall, and you see how it develops and you see the conviction. That's not how it works. Detectives and others are thinking about what happened. They don't have a clue. Maybe they get a clue and then somebody sits up in the middle of the night. That's what must have happened. And he jumps up first thing in the morning, gets dressed quickly, gets to the office early, and he opens up the file. Let me see if what I'm thinking is right. Yeah, there it is. Okay, let me look into that. And then he has to go bring in some witnesses or go interview some, and maybe another clue occurs. And see, things aren't like they are when you look at a dramatized presentation of some fictional or real situation. People have to develop them, and it takes time.
Have you heard about this latest person that came forward against Tyler Perry?
Well, look at what's happening with this move to support the tranny thing, all right? Tyler Perry got a lot of promotion in the industry, apparently, because Medea. He was being a tranny, portraying this woman repeatedly at great length in a movie franchise. The powers that be in the communications, entertainment, and news industry supported that. They supported him. He does not get paid the same as mainstream individuals do. But if you look at his stuff, it's so anti masculine that it's just glaring. It's like one of these liquid crystal screens, neon in lights, fireworks. It's anti masculine, and he's pushed for that. And there's another thing about the current entertainment industry. They've been pushing what some friends of mine would call mind crack. You can sell crack. Crack is big business, but you shouldn't sell crack because it does bad things to people. And crack isn't always a drug, sometimes it's a thing of the mind. And some people make a thriving business selling mind crack that, in the big picture of things, does very little to improve the development of what we call character and a whole lot to diminish those aspects of behavior that lead to what we call good character. So, no, I'm not surprised. I won't say too much more because I'm not into this gossip thing, but no. I think that, considering circumstances in this country and around the world, the issue of flaying the male human for what is the phrase toxic masculinity considerations is a dead horse. And when you do that too much, there's some bad fallout. I don't recall bunches of girls doing drive-bys in the urban areas, but seems to be that's still a popular pastime for young males. I don't recall young women going in and saying, stick 'em up, let it hit the ground, it's going down. That's the male thing. I don't recall that the neighborhoods are subject to predation, violence, and killing on behalf of a lot of young females, but I do see, have been professionally surrounded by an atmosphere of young males who were not properly socialized and acculturated, not acting like they had good character, and doing a lot of these bad things that do not promote public peace, dignity, and order, and make where some people have to live very unpleasant places with too much excitement.
You don't feel like he's a good role model for men?
No, I don't. It makes some women feel good. Talk about, they ain't worth nothing nowhere. Yeah, girl, I hear you. Man ain't good for nothing, but you know, blah, blah, blah. Well, lady, last time I checked, I think you've got 5 children, 3 girls, 2 boys. You want your sons to be men? Of course I do. Well, you keep talking about men aren't good for anything. So how are you going to raise your son to be a man if you don't know what he's supposed to be good for? That's the problem. And it's a self-fulfilling prophecy. You keep telling somebody all through his life that he isn't worth a damn. After a while, he might get to believing it.
So I take it you're not a fan of his movies.
They make me want to vomit. I really, really don't like them. It is an extremely negative stereotype that is being portrayed about the wrong kind of black female. It is a diss to masculinity, and there are always snide remarks being made about males. You will notice there's typically some elderly guy in there that is the butt of just about every kind of joke that can be made. And that individual tries to come back. It's, what is it? It's not her husband, it's her, what, uncle or something, or brother that's usually in there. The Medea character's relative or something that's always in the background, shuffling around and coming up with some kind of uh, barely uttered remark of defense, and she threatens to beat him or something, or it threatens to beat him, whatever. It's just a bad vibe.
Yeah, I don't know, man. I know he got a big female fan base. You know, those Medea movies. They love him, man.
It's like the choir is out there supporting negativism that generates applause from the people that think they're being treated in a negative fashion.
Yeah, hopefully it's not true, seeing all these people come out, because I mean, it's a little confusing. Because I mean, Tyler Perry, he never came out as gay. So, seeing all these men come out, I don't know what to believe, man.
He is, he is. Allegedly, let's just say that there are sightings at red carpet events, exits from limos and stuff like that, allegedly. When you get into the entertainment industry, it's their business. But if you get into Hollywood, the claim from Hollywood is 8 or 9 out of every 10 people you see in whatever their categories are deep off into that. When I first started with big ticket television that had the show, they had Judge Judy, and they already had it when I got there. They had acquired it from another studio. Moesha and the Parkers, Aaron Spelling had set this up, and he detested and despised the CEO, so he just sent him home. And then got upset that he had to pay this guy his paycheck since he basically had a no-cut deal. So he came up with big ticket television. And they got me. And there were 51 people in the administrative offices of big ticket television. And there were 3 straight people involved in this process: me, one guy who had gotten out of the military as a retired officer, who got the job through an uncle who was involved in Hollywood, and one sister who had been a girls' vice principal at an LA high school, inner city high school. And we used to meet up at a place called the Pinot, which was on the corner of Sunset, right there where the studio was, block down from Van Ness. And everybody used to sing the blues about how bad things were going because of the mistreatment straight folk got. I know I got one of the nastiest letters I'd ever read or had addressed to me in life about 2 months after the show started, because some people who identified themselves as devout lesbians were upset that they had to work for a straight man. And one of them even said she'd been involved for a quarter of a century and she'd never had to work for a straight person before, and didn't see why she should be required to work around or about one, me, at that time. So that was just typical of what was going on. But those are the allegations, and from what I was eyeballing and picking up on, yeah. I mean, Hollywood's foul. When I got my show back in 1998, they used to have me at the Beverly Hilton Hotel, and they had a function there. And the show hadn't even been going for a month and a half, but it looked to be a hit. So I was a bachelor and I was having a good time talking to the ladies. And I wound up sitting at a table with one that I wound up being on good terms with. She excused herself to go to the ladies' room. She took a little long coming back, I thought. And when she got back, she said, "Hey, you know this tall guy over there in the gray suit?" I said, "Yeah." And I told her what his position was. Says, "Well, he walked up to me and wanted me to sign this note, and he showed me $2,000 in cash if I'd sign it." I said, "Well, let me see it." It was trying to accuse me of trying to feel on her. And she said, "You didn't do that. You've been very polite." So I just said, "You know what? Let me see who else he's talked to." So she and I went around, and she did me the favor of doing the contacts, and she talked to all of the women that I danced with, and most of them said this guy had approached them with an offer of 2,000 cash if I'd signed some note accusing me of an impropriety. So we put a stop to that. I wound up hiring a woman for my public relations, and she and I set a trap that they fell into. So they weren't there 6 weeks after the fact. I was for another 14 years. So it is what it is. It's filthy. But that's what they do in Hollywood. And I imagine what Diddy was doing in his way was trying to get a defense to that. That's the way they roll.
Well, let me ask you this: since you was a part of Hollywood at one point,
I was never part of Hollywood. Let me explain. It was more like, are the Rams or the Dallas Cowboys or the Colts or the Dolphins part of Hollywood because Hollywood tapes them? They're the fodder. But what was going on, see, I was unique with all of the court judges, TV judges, in that I wasn't claiming to be running a court. I was running an arbitration proceeding. And back in 2000, the California Supreme Court issued a 23-page written opinion, and it held what I was doing was binding contractual arbitration under the California Judicial Arbitration and Mediation Acts. They said that they found that me by name was qualified to be a California arbitrator. Therefore, anything I did was official, enforceable. I could find people in contempt, and any ruling that I came up with could be taken into a California court and enforced. And that's what we had as an agreement, was anything that I ruled, if the contract stipulated it, we would assist the winning party in collecting it, and in certain instances, we would guarantee that whatever I awarded would be paid out. Now, in 2007, the United States Supreme Court, dealing with Judge Alex, ruled that what was going on was binding contractual arbitration, enforceable anywhere in the United States under what was an act of legislation known as the Arbitration Act of 1928 that was designed to put the trucking industry on a more equal footing with the then all powerful railroad industry. So I was doing something official. And that was also subject to something they said in the written opinion. It said everything that was done had to be subject to my personal approval. If anything was done, editing or otherwise, that I did not approve of, anybody involved would be liable to criminal sanctions and civil penalties or judgments against them. So when the how Lord High Muckety Mucks got upset, I'd say refer to page so and so, you can go to jail. So, in other words, what they were doing is simply televising an arbitration proceeding. The cases were real, and amongst other people that were referring the cases to the show, the Association of Small Claims Court Clerks in one particular state was giving us a lot of referrals. They liked it because it got it out of their system. A lot of things got interesting and developed, and I got a lot of accolades because I uncovered some criminal conspiracies, several, some with welfare, some with a chop shop, and some people wound up dead on that one because two people had the nerve, two very silly young females wanted to sue each other and another guy because he sold one a brand new stolen Chevrolet Impala for $2,700, and the other one was buying a Chevrolet Cabriolet, and she said she had to pay $2,400, but it wasn't as advertised. So she was complaining about it. So all three of them were involved in criminal enterprises. It was across state lines, and I said, "Where is the car?" And she said, "Well, I sold it for parts." So you took a stolen car you knew to be stolen, and you sold it for parts. Well, anyway, within a month of the show airing, the guy that was involved turned up dead because he was exposing an shop system that was operating across state lines, and some folk didn't like it. So it is what it is. That welfare scam you're seeing in Minnesota, well, I exposed one of those that was in Indianapolis, and they brought me there, and we went through this dramatic thing where they had this big board, and they whipped the cover off of it, and they had the pictures of maybe 50 some people that got indicted for this particular brand of welfare fraud. So, I mean, it happened. So, we were doing official stuff. There was another one, they had some fires out in California, and somebody sued somebody, and the guy, neither one of, well, the person that was the plaintiff didn't realize what they were doing, but a fire marshal came and he was in the audience. He came up afterwards and said, "You just exposed what was going on. We thought this was an accident. What you showed, it was intentional. The defendant in this case was trying to work with some developers who wanted to get the properties cheap, so they were setting fires. And as far as they were concerned, they did not care whether there were ashes that had to be cleared or trees." So that exposed something that led to some interesting developments, but some people were setting fires to acquire property cheap so they could develop it. But all kinds of stuff like that was going on. So it wasn't exactly Hollywood, it was real world. There's a difference.
But what I was about to ask you though was how demonic is Hollywood?
It is filthy. I've never seen anything like it because there are no consequences to doing what they do. I recall quite a few instances where I attended a meeting and I'm sitting in a leather couch on a leather chair, or in a leather chair or on a leather couch at the bar of a five-star hotel. And these guys are giggling about how they backstabbed each other and what they'd done to each other that was so wrong. I was saying, in my world, you'd wind up dead on in a gutter for this, or in a back alley, or with some broken bones behind doing what I'm listening to. But they giggle about it. And that's just the way they operate. It seems perhaps that years ago, some outside influences controlled what was going on and they had tight control over it, but they bailed, let's say, somewhere around the late 1950s, 1960. And when they left, the appropriate regulations weren't in place, and some people just got out of hand with what they were doing, and things got rather filthy. Uh, an interesting aspect of it is in The Godfather, the one Marlon Brando was in some years ago. Remember that scene where the director wakes up with the horse's head in the bed with him? And the earlier scene where the gangsters had his house under surveillance and they saw the woman bring her daughter in one evening, and then the next morning she was hobbling because the guy had deflowered her and had sex with this young girl. It was bad. That's Hollywood. Shirley Temple Black, who wound up being a U.S. ambassador to a thing in England. Do you know what the name of her agency was she worked for?
No, what's that?
Kitty porn. That was the very name of it. And you notice they always had her on with very, very short skirts. And she was always sitting in the lap of some old guy with a long gray white beard, and he would be grinning and patting her and everything. Well, the name of her agency was literally Kitty Porn. That was a reality to Hollywood. It was expected to be a place that was remote where they could control access to the studio lots. Uh, the parties that were involved with celebrities that were placed on these pedestals. They had security, and people lusted to be 10 feet from them, and they lived in these exclusive neighborhoods where everybody wasn't allowed to go, and there were all kinds of filthy things going on because these are adults who are spending their entire adult lives dealing with fantasy and make believe, and they got an opportunity to, I guess, lend depth to what they were about by engaging in satisfying their favorite fantasies. You familiar with Wonder Woman?
Oh yeah, definitely.
You familiar with the polygraph test?
Yes, sir.
The guy that invented the polygraph test is the person that created Wonder Woman. And he freely discussed in writing that Wonder Woman was based on a live-in girlfriend he and his wife allegedly had for 14 or 15 years. She was a dominatrix, and he was deep off into sadomasochism. And if you ever read some of the early Wonder Woman comics, it was the whip of compliance, the lasso of truth, the coil of submission. And that's what was happening. And he used to pontificate on the glorious attributes of submission and torture and infliction of pain. So these kind of things are closely attended upon each other. He's also the one that invented the so-called polygraph lie detector. Interesting juxtaposition of personalities.
How you feel about the people? Because I know I've been hearing it a lot lately, calling the church a business and saying that the pastors are frauds.
The church can be of service to humanity. It can also be one of its worst plagues. There are those preachers who get called because the word comes to them and they want to save souls. There are those who claim they were called, but what they want to do is increase their economic, increase their financial well-being. They want the big cars, they want the fame, they want to be able to line up people who wants to contribute $10,000, line up 5,000, 1,000, 500, line up. See, it's the same kind of game literally the street pimps we were talking about run, but they run it from a pulpit. They've got boys bouncing around right in front of the pulpit and they know what's going on, but they claim to advocate from the book, but they've forgotten all about, I imagine, say Leviticus 20:13. And they don't talk about these things. And instead of preaching to humanity about sin and right doing and ethics, morality, and principle. They talk about belief, and I've actually heard preachers say some things like, for example, you can be a pimp, a whore, a drug dealer, a murderer, or a thief. Doesn't make any difference. You can keep doing that, but you'll get to heaven as long as you believe. And I used to represent a certain Baptist Ministers Alliance 40 years ago, and I would attend their meetings and I'd hear this. They would be taking courses on how to get extra money in the collection plate, how to get certain members of the choir who were good at solo to sing certain songs and in which order, and how you did this during a month so you could build up. So people would say, that's exciting. I'm going to come this week. And by the end of the month, or whenever you set is the end for your money making period, you could open the doors of the church and get a huge sum in your collection plate, which you can pass 8, 9 times during the service. And then the ones that do it on TV, they rely on people trying to show out, I tithe 25%. Yes, I do. So they can brag, and the preacher gets rich, the deacon board gets rich, and it is what it is. They used to have me give remarks to churches in the Memphis area. But about 34 years ago, I stopped. They'd give me these big love offerings. And I'd say, I tell you what, I don't want it. Just do something with it within the church. So I forgot my hat, all collect hats. So I went back to get my hat. And the deacon board was dividing up the money. I said, what are you doing? So, well, you didn't want it, Judge. We decided we gonna take it. Well, I told you to give it to your youth program. Oh, they don't need it. Now give it back, fool. See, they do these things, and I think, well, Dante's Inferno mentions on a certain level of hell, there is a special section for this kind of prelate. So it is what it is. And I say this because I had a grandfather that was a bishop and an uncle that was a preacher. Matter of fact, my grandfather was one of Bishop Mason's first disciples and took Kojic to Kansas City in 1896 from Memphis. So I do have that connection, and I saw what they did. And last time I saw that, I was in law school. So it wasn't like I was just a child in ignorance or naivety, not seeing what I saw.
How you feel about TD Jakes?
Classic example. Line up for the $10,000 contribution, $5,000 contribution, and then we find out what he's been up to. That is unseeming conduct for a preacher man. But then it's not unusual. I studied the institution of slavery when I was with a D.C. think tank long time ago, up in D.C. And the interesting thing about it was instructions in what we call the slave pamphlets. They were kind of pamphlets on how to raise slaves for fun and profit. One of the primary recommendations to the slave owning crowd was have a slave preacher, but also have a slave stud that you can use to breed so you increase your livestock for fun and profit. Make the preacher and the stud the same person, and if you can't afford it, go in with your neighbors who are fellow slave owners and buy one. So have your slave preacher to be your stud, breeding stud. And there was a whole dynamic about setting that up in a church. Like the slave owners were instructed to attend services, not so much to hear what they were saying, but to watch. And if any of the slave women got to shouting and flopping on the floor and rolling over and over, that was a sign they were going into estrus. So you should have the slave preacher cover them so he might impregnate them and increase your livestock so you for sale or labor around your plantation. So that thing with the preacher being a main sex object for a bunch of frustrated female members of the congregation has long been the thing that came out of slavery. I had a interesting revelation again when I was representing this ministers association. I attended a meeting where they had insurance policies being discussed, and I was very fascinated with this information I just conveyed to you in mind. And the insurance expert was saying that his actuarial tables were showing that, presuming reasonable health, the typical black preacher would preach for about 50 years. In other words, from early 20s to mid 70s or later. And then it hit me. I said, this is in the 1980s. So in 1960, you got a young black slave preacher. He's 25. He'll be preaching until 1910. The guy that takes over from 1910 has been trained by this earlier preacher. He will be preaching until 1960. The guy that takes over in 1960, and this was in the 80s, will be preaching until 2010. So in the mid 80s, when this was going on, I said, this guy that's preaching right now, if he's at a big black church, will be effectively the grandson who's got direct contact from his predecessor with the slave preacher. So that entire atmosphere of sexual license an exchange going on inside the church will be carried over in it still. And that's why I'm representing some of you who have all of these paternity cases that I'm keeping your wives and congregation from finding out about. I had one guy, when he got to being a preacher, he had two outside kids that were subject to paternity matters. And by the time we got through, he had 14 in addition to the several he had home with his wife. That's not becoming for a preacher, but that was very consistent with what I'd been reading from some years before.
Did you see them photos of Bill Clinton when they dropped some of them Epstein files?
Clinton's a brave man. I saw him personally do some stuff when he was a governor that impressed me. He's got balls. He's a big guy. Used to be 45 years ago, he's pretty buffed out. And he was 5-term governor in what was probably one of the foulest, most crooked states in the United States, Arkansas, at the time. So he knows his way in and around rough politics. He did some good things, but some other stuff he did were things that are not good that elected officials should not be involved in. He had an eye for the ladies, and I know when you saw him, and since he was nearby, you saw him a lot in person. He, uh, let's just put it this way, he spent a lot of time on the podium girl watching. No big deal. Women are attractive, they're good to look at. That's why they make statues of them that get shown in prominent art museums all around the world. You know, they're in somebody's meeting place out in public. The Venuses. But I would imagine that a lot of things going on in Arkansas predispose somebody to have a worldview that is rather ruthless. He also was an extremely intelligent person with a remarkable memory. And I'll say this, Monica Lewinsky is somebody I met. When I first had this show, the studio wanted me to go to these courses about public speaking, and Monica Lewinsky, her mother and father, were there at these same workshops, and I had some conversation with them. She wasn't mad at him. She and her mother had a bet to see who could have sexual activity with the most important person, and she was very upset that this lesbian, Miss Tripp, or alleged lesbian, uh, informed on what she was doing because she was winning the bet. And her father had an interesting bumper sticker on his Mercedes that I had a Polaroid of for a long time. It said, "My daughter sucked the president." And he actually had a bumper sticker to that. So nobody in that crew was mad. But the thing that got me was her conversation about him. She said he had an amazing memory. And I saw him do something one time that, let's just say, somebody was really acting inappropriately. He was the governor, and he hauled this guy up, and he reached in his pocket, pulled out the man's wallet, flipped through it, looked at the guy's license, put the wallet back in his pocket, and said, "If I catch you out here, you and these guys, messing with my constituents again, I'm coming after you, and you live at such and such place. Your driver's license number is such and such. Your date of birth is so and so. Your place of birth is so and so." He had memorized the driver's license that quickly. that was indeed impressive. And what he was doing was helping out a voting movement that was being held in an Arkansas town, Jonesboro, if I'm not mistaken. And there was a rabbi involved, a couple of preachers, myself, League of Women Voters, and some of the agricultural organizations. They were being confronted by night riders riding around in flatbed trucks with shotguns and rifles. So it was impressive, but what he did to protect his constituents, and also the fact that he memorized the contents of this guy's wallet that quickly. So he was a very intelligent person. He had his merits, but I think some things went badly wrong with him. And he was not connected with the inner sanctum of American politics at that time. Now, I'll tell you another anecdote with him. Down in Hot Springs, Arkansas, Shelby County bar and bench folk, that's the practicing lawyers and the judges, we had some meetings down there. And myself and a couple of judges from East Tennessee decided we wanted to go see the trailer park where Bill Clinton grew up. So we drove over there, and when we got there, there were three guys, not two, having a fight. It wasn't two against one, it was one against one against one, and they were all drunk. And one of the judges said, Jesus Christ. He said, that man must be a really impressive human to survive coming out of this place and becoming president of the United States and getting a Rhodes Scholarship. Good gracious. That's a heck of a change. And it was, because he was a brilliant person. It's just that his politics and some of the associations he had were not good. Now, like I said, he had a programmed radar for the ladies. So it was like it was on and it went 24/7 nonstop. So I don't know what he and Epstein were up to, but if anything comes of it, I'm sure somebody will get some indictments returned or more will be heard when information develops. But as I said, just because you happen to be seen in a picture with somebody does not mean you support what that person's doing, and you may or may not know what they're about.
Yeah, I don't get it. I don't see what he did wrong. I mean, he just got a little fellatio from,
What, you mean Monica Lewinsky? She said she wanted to do it. She said she got off on it. She had a good time. So she saved the soiled dress so she could show her mother and win the bet, which she did. That's what she said to me. Yeah, she was totally willing. As a matter of fact, her motive was to win this bet. I think the bet was $10,000 the dad said he would give to the winner. Now, I understand this family. The mother is bragging about who she had sex with, and that was not including her husband she was still with. And the daughter was bragging about who she had sex with, and dad and husband was putting the money up to reward whoever won. Now, just imagine that. So, uh, it is what it is. She wasn't mad about it, or at least she said she wasn't.
Do you believe George Bush knew about 9/11?
I don't think he knew. I think there was information that was indicative that such a thing was going to go on, but whether or not somebody sorted through the false alarms and misinformation to give credence to what was pretty sound intelligence is another thing. And I'll give you an example of that. Why isn't somebody upset in the Democratic Party about the southern border being wide open And Al Qaeda, ISIS, Hamas, etc., Iran, North Korea, etc., and a lot of radical fanatics around the world with a deep and abiding hatred of the United States were allowed the opportunity to walk across our southern border with no investigation, no stop, no vetting, with backpacks filled with military grade explosives that they've had ample opportunity to set in various critical targets that they don't even have to play suicide bomber anymore. They can detonate from 4 or 5 miles away and watch the sky light up and the fireworks. So why is no one paying attention to these indicia that there is a disaster that's about to occur in the United States that would make 911 look like a 4th of July fireworks display rather than a serious consequence? Is that the same kind of situation that was ignored under the Bush administration? And see, the Bush administration is suspect. It's called Halliburton, and it's called Zapata Offshore Oil Inc. Uh, Zapata Oil was created by George Herbert Walker Bush, and it was a corporate entity that he set up under George Herbert Walker, Uncle Herbie. And Uncle Herbie, George Herbert Walker, had refounded Halliburton in 1946 in Oklahoma after it had originally been founded in Oklahoma in 1919, I believe, but went defunct. And Uncle Herbie was feeding George Herbert Walker Bush information about where Halliburton was going to finance or develop oil fields that would start being pumped out. And what Zapata Oil was doing is giving the property owners cash for a percentage of their mineral rights. The property owners didn't realize it, but Bush, Senior Bush, knew that oil was going to be pumped, so he was buying 15, 20, 25% of their mineral rights. So 3 or 4 years after he bought the rights, he would start getting big money in from the money that would be going to people whose properties ring these oil strikes or these fields where they were going to pump oil. He then set up something called Zapata Offshore Oil Inc., which was a holding company chartered in, guess where? Kuwait. So what wound up happening is when Hussein nationalized everything in Kuwait, the Bush family was effectively destitute. So after a successful conclusion to Gulf War I, the Bush family was rolling again because they got control of the money. Now, Halliburton in 2000 had been involved in intense negotiations with Iraq, Saddam Hussein, etc., to get the rights to exploit Iraqi oil. Well, France and Russia won and got the contract. We had 911, and that was in 2001. And then we got 2003, we have the false assertion of weapons of mass destruction being in Iraq. And we go in and invade Iraq. And what winds up happening is in 2007, Halliburton gets the rights to exploit Iraqi oil. And the last time I checked, been a while ago, but in 2008, Halliburton was netting somewhere between 2.3 and about $2.8 million every 7 hours out of what it was picking up out of Iraq through the ability to exploit Iraqi oil. Now, Halliburton is a Bush-Walker family enterprise. Caught up in it, and I alluded to this the last time I was on, you have Lolo Soetoro, who was the Indonesian oil baron. He was involved with Zapata Offshore Oil Inc. and Halliburton. And his stepson was the son of a certain American woman from Kansas whose father was first cousin to George Herbert Walker Bush, and George Herbert Walker was his uncle, and George Walker Bush was his second cousin, and his grandson, Barry Soetoro, we know as Barack Obama, was cousin to George Herbert Walker Bush, cousin to George Walker Bush, and also to the other cousin who was chairman and CEO formerly of Halliburton, we know as Vice President Dick Cheney. So all of them were cousins. There's another cousin that was involved in this, Warren Buffett, the billionaire, and there was another cousin who ran against Barack Obama when he first got elected. She was John McCain's running mate, and that was Sarah Palin, governor of Alaska. All of these people are family members. So you have to look at the records if they are available, and they are alluded to in various places. Used to be Google, but you won't find them on Google anymore, about the relationship of Lolo Soetoro, the Indonesian oil baron, and Halliburton, and also the oil exploitation. So all of these people are involved with each other. And the ancestor is a person known as Samuel Hinckley, Hinckley. And the references to him on Google have disappeared to a great extent, but you can still find stuff archived. He had as descendants 7 people who were U.S. presidents, 1 U.S. vice president, quite a few governors, quite a few U.S. senators, and quite a few U.S. members of the House of Representatives. So he had been an indentured servant, a Huguenot Protestant who had to flee France due to Catholic persecution. And he sold himself as an indentured servant for a number of decades to get transportation over to the New World, where he could be free to practice his Protestant religion. I guess his descendants did real well, and he would have been one of those people that, under Article 1 of the Constitution, was part of the 3/5 bunch for purposes of apportioning representation in the U.S. House of Representatives. Intriguing background when you back off and look at it. So Barack Obama was running against a cousin when he ran for president the first time.
Is there any truth to Bill Cosby being in talks about NBC? And do you feel like that played a part in what happened to him? Because a lot of people feel like, it's a bigger thing behind the scenes that happened to Bill Cosby.
I talked with him personally on the phone. He said he was, and I think it did. He had all of the financial arrangements set up to acquire NBC 2 times. He told me that they offered him a deal that if he just went ahead and fessed up to wrong, they'd let him out of the penitentiary immediately. There's so much wrong with that case. It got kicked, thrown right out of court, out of the system by the state's appellate court properly because of violation of his Fifth Amendment rights. He had been assured that there would be no prosecution, that the prosecutor's offices fully investigated the case. It was about nothing, and they were not going to go further. That being the case, the civil judge said, you have no Fifth Amendment concerns since you are immune to prosecution from the representation of the district attorney here, so you are compelled to answer these civil case questions. So he said, yes, drugs were furnished. Yes, sex did occur, but it was voluntary and willing. It was not done anything through coercion or anything else. Now, the new DA that came in promised that she was not going to be bound by this representation by her predecessor. It is not the individual, it's the office that counts. And if the DA's office had said, you're immune, and a judge relies upon it and says you have to answer and compromise your Fifth Amendment rights to remain silent to avoid self incrimination, then you can't go back and say, we're not going to be stuck by that. I decided, no, you can't do that. And it got thrown out. The judge had 60 days to prepare a report that he took almost 9 going on 10 months to prepare. And I think that was by design so that he could ensure that Mr. Cosby spent some time, since he knew Cosby was not going to stay in there. Nobody privy to the intricacies of the law would have bet on Mr. Cosby staying in jail because of the Fifth Amendment situation. He admitted action, but he did not admit any wrong to the action. And the bottom line for that was, it's called sex, drugs, and rock and roll and groupies. Groupies used to hang around with rock and roll singers, rap stars, football players, baseball players, basketball players, movie stars, television celebrities, you name it. And there was a groupie thing. Groupies are even famous in politics. A lot of folk like to hang, well, females like to hang with the elected officials because it's exciting. Sex, drugs, and whatever your particular fetish is about. So some of those people, I seem to recall having shown up in parties in the mid 1970s or 80s, and they were at some functions and they were party girls and they kept coming back. And then 30, 40 years, 50 years later, 30 or 40 years later, they didn't make it. Their careers got jump started, but it didn't progress. So they're angry. So they don't blame themselves. They blame the people that they chased after. And again, you know, it's part of that feminist thing. We got to get rid of men. They're all toxic. They're all evil. And it's crazy. Um, the law is getting corrupted by that. Not saying that things don't happen wrong to women, they do, but let's look at statute of limitations. Somebody pinches somebody on the butt, and a lot of states have ramped up the statute of limitations. So you've got 25 years, 30 years, 50 years to file a complaint. You have situations where somebody's 70 some years old and there's a complaint filed against them by somebody 70 years old about something that allegedly happened when they were in the back seat of a Chevrolet in high school, and nobody even remembers who's what. But they can proceed. But yet, let's take something like a wrongful death action where somebody's dead. You know what the typical statute of limitations is to bring a wrongful death action?
Nah, what's that?
About 2 years. So you got 2 years to make a claim against somebody for killing somebody wrongfully, even if it isn't criminal. But you got 35 years to go complain about a butt pitch. Something's wrong with the system. Understandably, women do not need to be treated wrong. That is a bad thing. But we will not prosper if we start putting inconsistencies into our legal system. And there's a matter of proportionality. I don't care how you put it, somebody being dead is a lot more serious than somebody finding out 30 years after the fact that they ought to have been feeling insulted because somebody told them that, you should be insulted. You got done grievously wrong. Oh, I didn't know that. So where are we going with this?
So you feel like a lot of the women that was accusing Bill Cosby were lying.
Well, it's not that they're lying, it's the effect of it. Uh, see, most people who are not old enough to have gone through it have no comprehension what the so-called sex revolution was about. I mean, they invented the pill. Venereal disease, STDs, there was nothing that a shot of penicillin would knock the symptoms out of in an hour, and you'd be recovered completely in 5 days. So people didn't have these horrible STDs that came back from the Nam when a lot of the Vietnamese prostitutes were getting 2 penicillin tablets and it was knocking out the symptoms, and they'd save the other 28 and give it to their friend girls, and you were building up these super uh, diseases over there. And that got brought back, and it really started hitting about 1972, 73 when the NOM started winding down. But I mean, it used to be so casual that sex between men and women was about as casual as asking somebody you already knew to a dance at a house party. It was just that free and easy. So we had this thing where these parties, people used to go to them. You'd get invited because you were a member of the Black Student Union and it's 1968, and all of the people that are in Hollywood or someplace, they wanted to mix it up with real live militant folk, and you would get a chance to show up at a party, and because you're young and black and you've got an afro and you've got on the fatigue jacket or the dashiki, everybody wanted to sleep with you. And if you had a TV show, God forbid, everybody was breaking down the doors to try and deal with you. So you got offers and all kinds of other stuff, and some of the future starlets were jump starting their careers and sleeping with anybody they thought would be helpful to their careers. But the problem with the casting couch is eventually, if you get to the top, you will have this part where you actually have to be able to do what you say you can. And if you can't, it's a disaster. You slept your way to the top, but you can't handle it when you have to be demonstrating your talent. So you get old and gray, a little fat, have to go to the gym an awful lot. You're in your 50s, 60s, or 70s, and your career has not been what you thought it was going to be. Well, maybe what you're mad at is somebody you think took advantage of you. So you say, oh, it's his fault or her fault, whatever the case may be. And everybody's upset because they want to make an example of somebody. But the problem is that you defeat your purposes when you keep creating these little deviations in the way the law applies, and nobody takes you seriously anymore.
You feel like he was innocent?
No, I'm pretty sure that the people that were making the accusations did what they did freely and voluntarily. I'm pretty sure they had the equivalent of buyer's remorse. They did what they did, and years later, they weren't too happy about it because it didn't work out.
How you feel about that assault case back then that Mike Tyson was convicted of? You believe he did it?
Don King jacked him up and wanted his money. That was horrible. They got a lawyer to represent him on that case that knew absolutely nothing about what he was up to. Not mean Tyson, but the lawyer didn't know what he was supposed to be doing. It was a horrible performance. Oh, yeah, Don King wanted to get a hold of Tyson's money. And what he did is when I think he probably talked to the woman involved and persuaded her that it might be to her advantage. And when Don King wound up getting the lawyer to represent Tyson, he picked somebody that had absolutely no aptitude for criminal law, no experience in it, and it was a disaster when it came to defense. Tyson didn't have a chance, whatever the merits of the state's case. But on the other hand, somebody I know who was into the bodyguard business said to prevent that kind of thing, when somebody came to visit one of the people that he was bodyguarding, he had a form that he prepared. He had a PhD, but he was a bodyguard. He'd have the woman sign the form saying, I am here to see him. I know intimacy and perhaps sex would be involved, and if it happens, I have no objection to this. Or if she did, then she would check the box on that, and he'd tell his charge that you don't need to be spending the night with her or have her up in here without anybody looking. So they'd sign off on this, and that protected the person that he was bodyguarding from any repercussions. But of course, with Tyson, that isn't what happened. So I don't know. I wasn't there.
You feel like it was a setup?
Possibly. It smells like it. You know what? When you go to where he grew up and you see what that place is like, you say, no wonder he has what he had. Until he ran into Lennox Lewis, he used to brutalize people. I saw that fight live. I was present at that fight, by the way. Interesting. I always liked boxing.
Same here. But yeah, I mean, that's crazy, man. I mean, if Don King, if he really did that, he a foul dude, man.
Yeah, he had that reputation. I don't know him personally, but that was the reputation, allegedly.
But to go back to earlier to Michael Jackson, we were speaking about him earlier. You don't believe that it was no foul play in his death. You don't buy into none of that.
Uh-uh. Uh-uh. He, the drug he was on was very dangerous. He killed himself. Look, you cut your nose, get your nose cut off because you've had multiple operations because you hate what your nose looks like. You've had bones from dead bodies put in to puff your cheeks up and raise your cheekbones up to get your chin changed so it's got a cleft and it's prominent. You've got all of these surgeries where every few months you come in and they got to peel your scalp back so they rethread your Polynesian hair, and you've gone through and gotten your melanin cells burnt out with laser treatment. What does that say about your self esteem and your own impression about yourself? Yeah, it's quite easy for that type of person to be careless of the drugs. That's one of the things about drug use is it's socially acceptable suicide. You have this thing of, oh my God, did you hear about poor Alan last week? No, what happened? Oh my God, he was talking about life has no purpose. And he jumped out of the 20th floor of his dad's office building. Oh, it was so hard. Oh no, I didn't hear that. Or you have, hey man, you hear about Stomp Man? What happened, man? We was over at Short Dog's place, man. We had some fire smoke up there, man. Everybody was hitting that glass. Next thing I know, man, dude down on the ground, heels was kicking, shit come all out his mouth, man. His eyes rolled up on the top of his head, man. As soon as we cleaned up, we called 911, but it was too late, man. Dude bust his heart out before the emergency folk got there, man. He dead on arrival, man. Hey man, oh, mama no freak, ain't that the second one she done lost this year? See, that's the whole thing. The individual does the drugs, they know it harms them. They don't like themselves, they'd like to kill themselves, but they don't have the nerve to put the pistol to their head. So drugs have claimed another victim. And then everybody speculates, do you think this is because of so and so? He really, was murdered? No, he killed himself. And see, another way you get this is this insane violence in the inner cities, barrios, ghettos, you get it. What's going on is somebody wants to die. So you've heard of suicide by cop. Well, there's also a thing called suicide by neighbor. You provoke your neighbor or somebody that's from your immediate community to take some action that does you the favor of taking your life. But in the process, in your provocation, you don't care about your own life. You don't care about this dude, so you take his. Hey, man, what you looking at, man? I ain't looking at nothing. You called me a lie, man. I see you looking at me. Man, I ain't looking at you. I'm getting ready to get your bus to go my job. Man, I ain't got no JOB. I don't care, man. Why you like call me a lie, man? Man, I ain't doing nothing, man. Just chill, man. Now, don't tell me what I'm gonna do and see somebody's about to die because they're trying to provoke something. There are all kinds of ways people commit suicide. Drugs have claimed another victim in South Dallas today. Neighbors complained of a foul odor coming from an apartment. Found so and so apparently died of an OD. Okay, yeah.
When you hear people say that it was foul play in the death of Michael Jackson and Prince, do you believe it?
Same thing with Elvis Presley, drug overdose. Same thing with Janis Joplin, drug overdose. Same thing with a lot of the singers. Marvin Gaye, drug problem. Um, a lot of the people that are looked up to as icons in the entertainment industry are not very happy people. They are alone. They're surrounded by a lot of people, but they are alone. They don't know how to really deal with other people the way they should. And their relationships are shallow and they feel depressed. And this happens. Michael Jackson was a chocolate brown young black kid, and he wound up being Snow White. And South Park, the adult cartoon, got on him several times about converting to being white. And he had a whole bunch of cosmetic operations. The word in Hollywood was that he had, for example, had hair replacements. So what that was about was you have to have your scalp peeled off from the back and you insert hair, in this case, allegedly Polynesian hair, which is knotted on the inside of the scalp sewed back. You take bone from cadavers and you add cheeks, a chin with a cleft in it, and you keep having nose operations. And from somebody that was a security person who used to work for me and decided that they were going to work out there at Neverland in Santa Barbara County, Ventura County, one or the other, in California, went to work out there and said he used to wear a veil. Why? Because he had no nose. His nose had been amputated and he looked like a dead zombie. And if you look closely at some of the last video, when they do a close up, as he's sweating, you can see the line of the prosthetic nose and where it's been attached by little pieces of tape that you can clearly see holding the nose on. So he was supposed to have been sleeping in an oxygen tent to save the nose, which was going necrotic, but they weren't able to do it. And supposedly, due to the pain from all of these operations where he had his face carved on, I guess he wound up looking like a Pokemon character, one of the cartoons. Anime, Japanese anime characters, not Pokemon. So probably was in pain. Pain can be interesting, and people do all kinds of things to accommodate it. Somebody I know was in Prince's band, and they told me he used to have problems with pain himself. You know, they work hard at what they do, the physical routines. And that was the pain medication. And we know that opiates and other kind of things can be very addictive and they can be very dangerous. People get too deep into them and they die. So I don't think either one of them got murdered. I think it was more the unfortunate circumstances of being able to afford getting anything that they wanted. Now, one of my tenants who was renting a property from me in California, let's just say I got to read some of the transcripts, and I think they made a pretty good case out for his use of drugs, and this was before he died. So it's tragic, but it is what it is. People do have these problems. And you have to understand that both of them were serving a function. What is the big thing right now on the rainbow cult side? Transsexualism. Transsexualism. Okay, what was Michael Jackson known as? Androgynous. In other words, no sex at all, neutral. Prince crossed the lines. Okay, what about Tyler Perry and Medea? You see, Hollywood anticipates things and they set stuff up so things happen when they want them to happen. They had Morgan Freeman in a series of movies playing a U.S. president. And I remember that, and I said, you know, Hollywood will sometimes forecast what's going on by what they put in as drama. And that's what you got with Michael Jackson. You got that to an extent with Prince. You got it to a whole great extent with Tyler Perry, where they were setting the stage to get the public used to this whole thing about the transvestite thing. And then you have that LGBTQIA plus, and that T part isn't necessarily compatible with the lesbian, bisexual, and gay component because, like one friend of mine who happens to be a lesbian told me, she likes pretty young girls and she doesn't exactly enjoy trying to meet up with one and then find out it's not a girl. She said if she wants to swing that way, she wants the real deal. So there is hostility even within the LGBTQIA plus community about this getting together for political strength in numbers, a coalition between elements that aren't necessarily compatible in the association of the LGBTQIA plus with this pedophilic thing. A lot of folk in that have very bad memories of getting turned out by a pedophile. Now, we get over to the thing you were just asking about. Well, what do you want to know?
The way that Marvin Gaye passed away. You got any insight?
Yes, I do. Somebody that was a very close friend of mine, now deceased, used to be somebody who promoted concerts, and Marvin Gaye was sprung. I wound up, after he died, not long after he died, I bought an album, the CD of his last concert tour. And he was, I forgot the words. I forgot the words. Help me now. What comes next? And he was stumbling and he was going, you don't have to hold me up. I'm all right. I'm all right. And it was pretty obvious that he was just stoned out of his mind high. All right. And what seems to have happened is he got around his father and pushed him too far and was going to brutalize him. And his dad just said, I don't play that. I brought you here. I can take you out. And he killed him. And under the circumstances, it was held to be a justifiable homicide. But he got tragically sprung, badly sprung. And I remember saying, okay, well, I enjoyed his music. Let me get this last album he came up with. And I'm just saying, what is this? I mean, every song in here, he's telling the audience, I forgot the words. Help me out. You know the words. And he sounds like he's stoned or high. So I can see there being a legitimate basis for that.
Yeah, that's a good point. But speaking of Michael Jackson, Joe Jackson, you believe he was a good father or no?
I think he pushed them and tried to keep them straight. There's an unholy thing about how they got where they were anyway. I had a neighbor, and the neighbor was featured in a documentary as being a driving engine behind certain illicit activity going on in the entertainment industry. Back in the 1960s, the late 1960s, it spread through the militant crowd that Berry Gordy of Motown had been approached by this gangster who essentially pistol whipped him and took 15% off of the top of everything Motown got. Well, it just so happened that I ran into that person a lot later in life, and that person, let's say, was a neighbor of mine. So, having a drink with him, he told me how he had done that. And he had told me a story about the Jackson Five. The first Watts Festival was had in 1966. I attended, and there was a talent show, and the winner was supposed to get a Motown contract. I was present when the crowd voted on it. I was present when the winner was announced. And the first one that won was somebody that kind of might, in her singing style, remind you of Aretha Franklin. The second place group was a group that would remind you of, say, the Four Tops or the Temptations. Down in number three and number four was the Jackson Five. Well, this particular individual told me that his concern was interested in a boy band. So they contacted everybody and they said, these young boys are going to be the winners and they're going to have the Motown contract. The LA Times had printed up the list of the winners right after it happened, and then a day or so later they said, oops, there was a mistake. We have a revision. The Jackson Five won. So this individual told me out of his own mouth that that's because his group wanted a boy band and they thought the Jackson Five would do fine. And he also admitted to pistol whipping Berry Gordy and getting 15% off of the top from the Motown income. And also advised the control he had. Now, some years later, I was in a hotel room in New York for a conference. And my bodyguard at the time and I were in this suite and we were watching TV, and he said, "Isn't that your guy that you know?" I said, "Yeah." They had his picture. So we listened to all of these people that were doing life in the penitentiary that had supposedly done hits for him at a time when the U.S. Supreme Court had said, under the standards being used, the death penalty was no longer going to be appropriate. So they were talking about how instead of getting the chair, they got life in the penitentiary. It wasn't fair because there he was in retirement enjoying himself. Now, that's been about 23, 24 years ago. So he was in his late 80s at the time. I'm sure he's either dead or over 100 by now, but he was an interesting person and he had a lot of contacts. So things happen. It's an industry that was rife for somebody doing that because the Hollywood crew, for the most part, is not grounded in the real world. Now, you do have exceptions like Clint Eastwood or mm, some people like that, um, Audie Murphy. Most people don't know who he is these days. You had Lee Marvin. Lee Marvin was a Marine. He got shot twice in Iwo Jima. He was a real live badass. The others had military backgrounds. They actually got shot at. Um, the individual I said nobody knows who he is, Audie Murphy, he has the distinction of being the most decorated soldier in American history. He got the Congressional Medal of Honor, Croix de Guerre, uh, Distinguished Service Cross, Silver Stars. He held up a German battalion all by himself with a machine gun on top of a tank after he'd been, that was in Germany, and that was after he got decorated in Africa and in Italy too. He was a real live badass, and he was a star in a lot of westerns. I think 40 some westerns, and he played a real live badass. He just had a little problem with being a homicidal maniac. He liked killing. And he wrote a book that's interesting to read. It's called To Hell and Back, and they made a movie, To Hell and Back, where he starred himself, and he got killed after a successful Western career in a plane crash. But there are these people who are exceptions to the Hollywood rule who've actually done stuff in the real world. I tell you somebody that Hollywood hates with a passion. Believe it or not, James Cameron. Abyss, Titanic, uh, stuff like that. He started off as an oceanographer, and he used to do assignments for the U.S. Navy, that deep Cold War spy stuff of getting a hold of Soviet missiles that had been test fired or Soviet aircraft that had gone down. And he's one of the people that explored the Titanic, and he used that as a cover to investigate some Soviet nuclear submarines. And he is interesting. He holds the record for the second deepest dive in human history. Two U.S. Navy officers went to the bottom of the Marianas Trench in 1960, but he went just a few hundred feet less to a slightly shallower part of the trench all by himself. And he's a real live badass, and Hollywood hates him because he's not a fake. And when he does a movie, it's real. That thing with the Titanic he did, my ex wife used to work for the real woman We had a ceramic studio nearby to where we lived. The one, remember the old lady in the movie who throws the necklace into the water when she's old? That was a real person. So Cameroon set that up and he had all the details because he was the one that was honchoing the exploration of the Titanic wreck. There's another one he's done with the wreck of the Bismarck, the battleship. And I understand he's conceptualizing a movie on that. That may just be a rumor, but he's a real live badass, and there are a few in Hollywood. And interestingly enough, there's a lot of pushback because so many of those people are fakes. They have never done anything like that. You've got a few like Isaiah Washington, who was a real live Marine, and you should see him work with a 45 auto. I mean, he's fantastic. He can do the double taps, and the hammers, and I mean, he can drop a magazine and get another one in the pistol and the slide back down on a live round in the chamber before the first magazine hits the floor. Blam! I mean, it's fantastic. You've got people like that who are real, and they should be appreciated. You've got some other ones, Arnold Schwarzenegger, Governor, also the Terminator. But I did not know this until later on. I looked it up. He actually wrote 6 textbooks on economics. I mean, heavyweight text material, not just lightweight stuff. And he did something I thought was very bad against somebody that was a student on a playground I used to help run. It was Trinity Avenue Elementary School. The guy was famously known as Tookie Williams, who was listed as one of the co-founders of the Crips out in Los Angeles. Tookie was a very, very bright kid. We had high hopes for him, but due to some family situations, couldn't get him out of the swamp, so he just became the baddest alligator in the swamp. He was sitting on death row, and Schwarzenegger should have commuted his sentence to life in the penitentiary rather than death. But I don't think he did because the good governor didn't want it known that he used to pump iron with and spot for and have spotted for by Tookie Williams at the Gold's Gym in Santa Monica. That wouldn't have been anything but productive to some bad press to have the governor of California have worked out 2 or 3 times a week with somebody sitting on death row. But Tookie wrote some interesting children's books where he tried to teach what we were trying to teach him on the playground, and he was the last person executed. He was so buffed out muscular that it took them 45 minutes to get a tube into his veins, and the stuff didn't work out right because they weren't giving him the right dosage. I guess he had a high absorption rate. He was so muscular. And it took him a long, long time to die, and a lot of people saw that, so they haven't executed anybody since. But there are those things that are the realities, but that was just an anecdote about Governor Schwarzenegger, who, by the way, was a hard-working man. You'd see him out in L.A. riding on a Harley motorcycle while he was the governor. That was just what he did. So he used to get up at 4 o'clock every morning and go work out. Then he'd have breakfast, and then he'd have the first meeting as governor. He wouldn't stay in the governor's mansion because it was ramshackle at the time, and he flew himself at his own expense to Sacramento, paid for the hotel bill. He'd have meetings all day and drive his staff crazy because he's got them running back and forth doing stuff until 1 o'clock in the morning, and he'd get 3, 4 hours of sleep every night. And he'd keep that routine up and then fly back home on the weekends. So he's a hard-working guy. He was intelligent. And those kind of people, you do have something coming out of Hollywood. I knew somebody, she's still around, but we used to ride to school together at UCLA, Tracy Reed. She was in Love Boat, Love American Style, Car Wash, and a series of movies with Billy Crystal about detectives up in Chicago. Beautiful woman, but she was intelligent, and she was one of the volunteers on Trinity Avenue Elementary School playground. She worked with Tookie too. And she was in the movies, but she was a brilliant woman, and she got in UCLA as a freshman at 16 years old instead of 18 because she skipped so many grades. So there are people that are in Hollywood who are very intelligent. Wesley Snipes knows his martial arts. A brother of mine, Clifford Stewart, used to be his bodyguard and his advisor and confidant. And Wesley knew his stuff. Those sword fights, he knew how to do that for real, so they didn't have to have anybody stand in for him. And he was a good guy. So he was conscientious. I met his mother along with Magic Johnson's mother and some other folk 35 some years ago. The NBA used to do this thing where they would bring in inner city youth from the ghetto and the barrio, and they would teach them basketball, and they'd have me there giving lectures the way I did it on character. But I ran into him way back when, and he used to do stuff for the U.S. government. Seriously, some of the stuff he did in the movies, he did for real for the U.S. government. When he was sentenced, the judge got mad at his defense counsel for not immediately going there, but he had high ranking military officers and other folk who were talking about what he did for the country. And one of the things we were pushing was that had it not been for a late airplane, he would have been in the Twin Towers when it got hit 911. But fortunately, the plane was late, so he didn't make it and didn't have his family up there waiting. And by the way, I'll say this on him, he did not defraud IRS. He got convicted of failing to file a complete set of tax returns, and I was there to witness this in person. While we were there for sentencing, no, motion for new trial and sentencing, sentencing, not motion for new trial. The judge was putting that after sentencing as a favor. While we were there, IRS tendered him a check for $250,000 for overpaying his taxes. They keep saying he was guilty of defrauding IRS. He got convicted for failing to file a complete set of returns. The feds were after this firm that did his taxes, and they convicted 11 of them. He was the only client that they prosecuted. He had never been into that area in Florida where the trial took place ever in his life. And the jury found him of the least serious included offense, which was failure to file a complete set of returns. One of the issues was that the tax preparation group was in that category where if they fill out their taxes, you, as the taxpayers, are personally responsible for their errors. If they had been certified by IRS like they were claiming, then they would have been responsible for the error. So Snipes relied on them for 3 years to fill out his tax forms, and he was out of the country for most of that time filming. And he didn't even know what they did. He just signed the papers, but they got him for not filing the whole set. So his lawyers did not do a very good job. In fact, it was horrible, one of the worst I've ever seen anybody perform. The judge got mad at defense counsel, and I was one of the witnesses that he demanded be called because of a letter I wrote in support. And The defense effort was so poor that the judge said, "You leave me no choice. You don't give me anything in this record to go on. Would you like to try again?" And they kept going down this alleyway somewhere in the Never Never Land, and the judge said, "I have no choice." So Snipes got 3 years in the federal penitentiary for failing to file 3 sets of complete tax returns. There were 3 misdemeanors, but the defense was so piss poor that under the guidelines, the judge had to run 1 year for each one consecutive. So he got a 3 year sentence. A shame. But his wife put together a defense team that included me and several other lawyers, and we filed a habeas corpus. But the appellate court said, although what we did was adequate, they couldn't consider it because of the very poorly done appeal that was filed. So he got stuck doing 3 years, and people are bad mouthing him, saying he tried to defraud the federal government or IRS. He didn't. Now, Obama's Secretary of Treasury, Geithner, got convicted 6 months before he became Treasury Secretary of intentional defrauding IRS of $28 million, and he got 6 months suspended and a $42,000 fine. Wesley Snipes had 3 misdemeanor counts where he failed to file a complete set of returns. He got 3 years in the federal penitentiary. Doesn't seem right.
Well said, well said. Judge Joe Brown, great interview, man. Great interview, like always. Very insightful. We got to run this back real soon, man. Great interview. Before we head out, let the people know what you got going on.
Okay, I was on X, but I got permanently suspended for not being me, or because of numerous complaints that AI says that I had, which they can't produce a single one of. And I'm permanently banned from Facebook, even though I've never posted anything on there. I just had an account so I could read or see what people were sending me. And I had the maximum number of, what do they call them, friends. So I don't have that, but I do have a pretty good barbecue line that I think you will probably find is the best out there. It's called Judge Joe Brown Barbecue. And if you want to find it, it's on Amazon. And if you're a member of Amazon Prime, you get free delivery in 2 days. So we always sell out and have to send them extra supply every month. We're also online at JJB, Judge Joe Brown Barbecue, BBQ. So that's jjbbbq.com. And if you go there, you can see the many and sundry products we offer, from meat products, Beyond Meat, which is the vegan substitute for meat to taste like meat, hot, mild chicken, beef, links, hot, well, mild and spicy sauce, mild and spicy rub and seasoning and recipes and stuff. You can see Tiffany Haddish, who's one of my partners, do stuff. We're partnered with Michelle Dukes, who is one of the few women that owns a distillery in the United States, and she's got a great bourbon that is superb. I can vouch for it. Chef Damon, who is one of Beyonce's personal chefs, he collaborated in making stuff suitable for places like Sprouts or Whole Foods, where there's nothing harmful in it. And he cleaned up stuff that I had been working on for 45 years. It's won contests and stuff. And if you want to taste it, as a certain version of it can come about if you're in Los Angeles, go to 79th and Western down in the hood to D's Original Takeout Grill, and you can get the stuff prepared down there. It's pretty good. So we're doing that. Judge Joe Brown barbecue, and also these folk are talking me into running for county mayor here in Shelby County. That's Memphis. I think that's going to work, and I'm going to pull a petition shortly. So let's see what goes on. The last time 3 years ago, I ran for city mayor, but what happened is the local daily newspaper, Channel 3, 5, 13, 24, that's ABC, NBC, CBS, Fox, CNN, they wouldn't carry any of my ads, and they showed another Joe Brown's picture and wouldn't mention that it was Judge Joe Brown running. And the Joe Brown in question was a former city councilman and clerk of one of the court systems around here. So they ran his picture for 5 weeks on all of the media outlets, knowing good and damn well that wasn't who was running for the mayor's position. People saying, "Why didn't you run for mayor?" I said, "Hell, I did. That was the clerk. No, it was me." "Well, why did they show his picture?" "Yeah, good question asked." And they were saying, "Sue us." Yeah, if I did, it would be too late and a lot of money would be wasted on nothing. So here we go again. This time the county is a different demographic, but the city is inside the county. So there are about 1.5 million folk here. So let's see what happens. Last time I ran in the county, next to last time, I got every precinct in a contested election. That's been a while, but let's see what goes on. This place could be saved, and there is a video out there where it's 45 minutes long, and I break down what's going on here in Memphis and what can be done to make this a heck of a place. But try the barbecue. You can practice during the winter when nobody cares, and you can impress your friends and relatives when the summertime hits. And by the way, little message to somebody you had on that had some very negative comments with me about me, because he was so fixed on, I'm not going to mention his name, but here's the message. Uh, Jefferson Street Comedy Club, Sweet 16, 10K brown bag. I know who delivered it and who was delivered. Witness that I had, shall we say, on my payroll for a long time. Be careful, that might come to light. You won't like it. So that's 10K, Sweet 16, Jefferson Street, brown paper bag. He'll know what it means. So shut the hell up, fool. We know you are moist and in your name, and somebody in your family says it's okay, but they haven't heard of Leviticus 20:13 and what that says. So let it ride. Don't want to talk about it anymore. I'm being nice.
You referring to my interview with Judge Mathis?
Oh, yeah. People brought it to my attention. A lot of people were upset. That little loose threat about what he would have done in Memphis. I have no control over what some of the people who love me here might do. So um, people don't like that. Oh, by the way, Jefferson Street Comedy Club. Put that in the mix. You'll know what's being said. Just keep your mouth shut. You think you got that, but we know where you're coming from, because you said he's lying. He wouldn't quit, not with that much money. See, but I did. So it was a whole lot of money, but I walked away from it. You indicated that you have your price, good sir. So uh, 10K, Sweet 16, paper bag, Jefferson Street, Comedy Club. I know the details and everything that's behind that, and